Yeah, really appreciate everybody's time today. Welcome to the webinar. Run through a couple of really quick housekeeping items, and I'll do a quick introduction, and we'll get started. So, to start things off with, I mean, this is going to be a really strong and well overdue webinar topic in regards to kind of some of the five kind of ways that we feel that AI will be impacting grants and grant makers, and also for those of you on the call who are also doing things like scholarship programs or fellowships, or even conference abstract collection. It's going to be a very similar type of impact on you, and kind of where we see both the current environment where we sit and kind of what the long-term environment looks like. And then, we'll kind of dig into both a couple different tools and areas I think of opportunity. The reason why I mentioned that this is a well overdue topic is number one is I'm going to jump ahead to the agenda, but you can kind of see at the bottom right, there's a QR code called the wait list. And the reason why I bring that up, and this is the first time we've actually announced it publicly, is in the next month and a half or so, we at Review are excited to announce that we're going to be launching our first kind of AI assistant tool for grant makers that we're calling Wingman. And so the waitlist QR code there at the bottom, which we can kind of recap here at the end, kind of grants you access to the platform potentially to opt in to kind of lock you into the current pricing structure because things will be changing probably in June, July timeframe. No obligations, but I just want to kind of let you know that that QR code is going to follow us along if you ever do want to kind of get on that wait list to get some more information about Wingman. That does lead us though into the agenda for today. So it's kind of really four things I want to talk through. So I'll kind of give a quick introduction of who I am, what we're doing here at Reviewer, why we're kind of qualified to talk about this, and then kind of the four or five kind of key components that go into, I guess, AI for grant makers, which would be the intelligent automation, very specific to the grantees or the applicants who are applying to these programs, as well as kind of some of the content creation assistance tools, which is going to be kind of a polarizing discussion, I believe, because there's a lot of frameworks in place and benefits of leveraging these tools, but at the same time, there's a gray area and a fine line of how much AI utilization is too much for applicants that bleeds into them just completely writing their applications and their content creation from scratch. Which then leads us to the third piece, which, as you can see here, is already kind of highlighted, which is going to be where Wingman is going to kind of inject itself initially, which is going to be both AI as well as kind of copyright or plagiarism detected content creation. So how do we flag and identify content within an application that might have leveraged some type of assistance or tools? And the last thing we're going to talk about is actually be a combination of the last two bullets, one of which is the streamlined administrative workflow. So how do we leverage AI to make our lives easier as grant makers? While at the same time setting us up for success to ensure a fair, non-biased review and selection process, which if anybody on this call has been a part of any of our other webinars, I'm a big proponent and stress a big emphasis on the review and selection workflows and creating a fair, non-biased, redacted review and selection workflow for the review team. So that kind of leads us into our introduction of why we built Reviewer. So don't want to get too deep in the weeds on this today, nor do I really want to highlight too much of the Reviewer platform itself, besides the kind of introduction to Wingman. But started the company back in about 2012, late 2011, and we did so from our very own, I guess, first interactions and volunteer perspectives, working with mission-driven organizations. So we were very heavily involved working alongside funding opportunities from investment competitions to grants to scholarships to fellowships, you name it. And when I say volunteer, what I really mean is that we were part of the review committees, thus the name Reviewer. And it was a rough time back then because platforms like Reviewer didn't exist. And so if you think through like what a typical grant making workflow or process looked like, believe it or not, it was done through 3-ring binders and physical paper. So as a review committee member, we had hundreds and hundreds of these applications being mailed to our doorstep that we were tasked with reviewing, handwriting notes, handwriting feedback. And a lot of times we meet in person on the weekends or through phone calls and collaboration with other community members to announce recipients. And so, as you can imagine, as a volunteer, it was extremely overwhelming. We didn't have that much time and energy to share. But then over time, we started to see kind of this transition in the industry when organizations would go online. And what that really meant was a combination of built-in web forms, downloading of documents, spreadsheets, leveraging their databases, and trying to utilize all of them in conjunction with one another. But as a committee member, as a reviewer, it actually created additional work for us than the paper processes did. Because at least with the paper processes, they were centralized, albeit they're heavy and physical. Now we're using like 9 or 10 different tools or platforms, none of which were intended for the task at hand. And we started to hear these really terrible horror stories popping up. So, for example, in a grant program, you'd have review committee members who are making unfair selections based off of both personal biases or details about the applicants, such as their demographic background. We started to hear from our scholarships that we were working alongside that there were applicants who were applying via email, and a handful of them would go to a spam filter. So they would actually sit down and award funding to individuals, and then months later find out that there were a handful of people that didn't even get included in the initial review. So at the end of the day, as a mission-driven organization, as a volunteer, we went on this kind of war path to basically never let that happen again. And that's kind of what turned into Reviewer as an online platform that's intended to kind of run these entire application-based review, management, and selection programs, scholarships, grants, member recognition awards, from literally start to finish with kind of two parallel goals. One is from a mission-driven organization perspective. How do we empower you to focus on your mission and your vision, and less so worrying about downloading your documents and emails and spreadsheets? But even more importantly, is that you make up a third of the program. So how do we elevate the experience for the applicants and those review committee members as well? So this was the journey that we kind of went down. At this point in time, we do thousands of these campaigns every year, from organizations of both big and small. And that really brings us, excuse me, full circle into why we're having this discussion today. Is we pride ourselves on not just providing a really innovative and industry-leading software, but more so that we have our kind of ears to the ground and a pulse of what's going on, because we work with thousands of people like you on this call today who are bringing to us unique challenges or things that they're seeing happen within the space that likely aren't just impacting them, it's impacting others as well. And so for us, it's all about how do we kind of aggregate and centralize and kind of bridge the gap of communication between our clients as well as our peers in the space, to identify trends within the industry that we can kind of elevate and make the space better together. And so with that, that brings us to this hot topic right now called AI, which, as we know, has blown up over the last 12 to 18 months with the adoption of things like Chat GPT and Claude and Meta's new AI tool, and how it's impacting the industry. And so again, we're going to talk about kind of 4 or 5 core themes today. The first of which I want to talk through is going to be very largely dependent on the application side of things. But before we go there, I want to kind of take a look at like what the current state of AI utilization is for grant makers as well as kind of grants in general. So, you can kind of highlight this or draw this in a lot of different ways. You could do an iceberg, and we're at the very tip of it. I chose to kind of go down this winding road. And the reason why I chose a winding road is that it's not going to be a clear one-dimensional linear path from kind of where we are currently to potentially where we're going. And where we're going might be a year from now, it might be 10 years from now, it might be a whole different kind of fork in the road that we decide to take. We don't yet know. What we do know is it's a very evolving space and we're kind of on this journey and on this road together. And so I personally feel like right now we're at the very early sides of things where I have extreme confidence that a large percentage, and some of the research that we've done is roughly 70% of applications to these types of programs are leveraging tools like ChatGPT to assist with their content creation. So in the scholarship space, it might be essays. In the grant making space, it might be impact statements or fund utilization forms, right? And it could be very, very simple in the sense of like, here's what I'm being asked to fill out, provide a framework so I can build off of it. Or it could be from start to finish, answer this question for me, we'll load it up, and we're just going to use your content. And the challenge we're running into is that these tools are so lifelike and they write such robust and incredible content, especially if the applicant knows how to interact with these tools and provide it prompts and take the answers back and massage it and tweak it, that it's very hard for us to even understand what was self-generated and what was assisted. So I feel like that's kind of where we're at right now with most of these programs. People are entering the application process. They have side by side their forms, they have Chat GPT, and they're using it to kind of massage and help them create their content. On top of that, though, I think I try to position where we at Reviewers sit, where we're kind of in doing two things. Again, number one is the injection of Wingman as a tool to help you kind of combat some of these challenges. Number one, operationally. So how do we kind of elevate the experience of the applicants, make it easier for them, while also from an operation side of things, make it easier for you. But then also, how do we kind of go back full circle and help you detect potential utilization of these AI content creation tools like ChatGPT and Claude? It doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing. What we want to do is bring to light, like, hey, flag it that this might have been used with one of these tools, and let you make those data decisions off. We'll kind of get back into that. And then kind of the big red icon here, and kind of what we're all probably looking at is where I personally believe is that someday we're going to get to autonomous grant management and selection. I mean that we're going to be able to deploy these grant application forms. We're going to be able to allocate dollar amounts, the criteria and the type of applicant that we want, and then let it run its course. And then a system using AI will actually be able to tell us, hey, out of all the applicants we received, these are the three. Here's how much each is going to receive. And I know that's a very broad and very impactful statement, but I do believe at some point we're going to get there. When, how, who, how are we going to do it? I don't yet know, but I'm just trying to be kind of sensitive that there's a lot of moving parts, and we are going to work alongside you to figure out like where can we kind of position ourselves together to find this middle ground to still provide as much impact as possible to the applicant. So with that said, we're going to focus primarily here on where we currently are and then what we're currently doing. So with that said, I'm going to kind of let this run off in the background just for a second to show you how simple it is for organizations or for applicants to leverage these tools. So as you can see here, we actually in real time have kind of an example running where we have a series of application questions that are being put into a Google Doc. And on that Google Doc, the applicant is basically saying, here's who I am, act on my behalf, answer these questions, use this tonality and answer them in a certain number of characters or words. And you can see in real time within less than 30 seconds, ChatGPT is actually generating responses that the applicant's able to copy and paste directly into the application form. And that's happening. Again, 70% of content is being collected in these application forms that are using some way, shape, or form of this content creation. And if you look real closely, you can look at the content that was generated. So in this use case, one of the questions was to basically explain a favorite book and how it's impacted them in their journey. And they talk about The Innovator's Dilemma by Clayton Christensen. And it's so well thought out that I don't believe any of us would actually be able to identify the fact that that was written with the utilization of ChatGPT. So how do we even the playing field for those that might be doing this versus those that don't, especially when we're talking about life-changing opportunities with funding? So number one is let's get in, keep this in the back of your mind because we absolutely will come back to this. But from an application perspective, number one is that we want to leverage intelligent automation. So what I mean by that is we want to level the playing field as well as lower the barrier for the applicant. So number one is a grant recommendation and matching. So again, this is a little bit of a side tangent. We'll come back more to the AI detection. What I want to focus more on now, though, is how do we kind of create these custom application processes utilizing artificial intelligence to create a very personalized experience to the applicant. Because at the end of the day, they're interacting with the systems, they're interacting with the forms, we're collecting powerful data about them. How do we leverage that data that to downstream provide them a very custom experience? So, for example, we work with an organization that offers about 50 different grant opportunities, and each of those grant opportunities is very hyper specific. It can be dictated by the funder themselves, as well as some of them might be for very specific criteria. So, for example, grant funding to biotech companies who are trying to solve a very specific challenge within a very specific time frame. And so you have this giant pool of grantees and these applicants who are seeking these opportunities, and many of them may not even be aware of the opportunities available to them that your organizations might be offering. You might actually have grant opportunities that are going unfunded, or that you're kind of, how do I say this nicely, making sacrifices and awarding funds to potentially not even the best quality candidates because the best quality candidates didn't even know it was an opportunity. So how do we kind of leverage this type of recommendation concept that can kind of read information about the grantees and then say, hey, based off of your kind of profile or your demographic background or your criteria, here's the opportunities you're actually eligible for. Now, on top of that, the polar opposite kind of use case that you're going to start to see is applicants who are start to apply to every grant opportunity because they need funding and they don't really care about what they're eligible for or what the criteria are. They're kind of shooting fish, and they basically are saying, hey, here's all the different opportunities. I'm going to apply to all of them, and we'll just kind of see which ones might trickle in. So two challenges come into play there. Number one is that we're wasting an extreme amount of applicant energy filling out these applications that they just have no chance of receiving. But number two is from an operations perspective, you're spending a whole bunch of time and energy sifting through reading these grant applications and basically vetting them thumbs up, thumbs down when the systems potentially could have done that for you, knowing that they weren't going to be a fit for kind of what your clear mission, vision, and values look like. So again, number one, how do we collect information about people and then personalize the experience for them? How do we kind of showcase specific information that's only relevant to them? How do we kind of go through the grant application process, making recommendations? And then also, how do we kind of start to create some type of qualification or screening? You can even go as far as saying creating like a preliminary score sheet that requires zero human interaction, that reads content within their application form, assigns point values that align with kind of what you're looking for, your mission, your vision, and your selection criteria, and then leverage that to kind of narrow down a much larger pool of applicants to a much smaller number that then advances on to the next phase, which would be the actual human looking at it, reading through their applications form, conversing with them, communication, score sheets, etc. So, and at the end of the day, the goal is to kind of intertwine all of these kind of theories or concepts together. So, without looking too much at reviewer, I do want to kind of visualize like what this type of intelligent application process could look like with or without reviewers to kind of give you a sense of what people are actually doing right now in real time. So, for example, this is a sample grant application form, and there's kind of two different specific workflows that we can kind of look at here. So, number one is that you offer specific grants for certain purposes, right? And so it's allowing the applicants to come in, and it's going to allow them to see what opportunities are available to them. They can pick which ones they want to apply for, and then from there, either make them eligible or not. Number two is this might be the use case I mentioned earlier, where people don't even know what grant opportunities are available. They just know that there's something. They fill out a series of questions and then let AI in the system say, hey, based off of your criteria and your profile, we match you up really well with these opportunities. Which of or all of do you want to proceed with? So let's kind of take a look at that. To answer your question, yes, this is absolutely going to be recorded as well as interactive kind of tours and blogs written that we'll share back out. So I appreciate your time and I appreciate it. So kind of moving on. So in this example, we actually chose, hey, you know what? I'm going to use the grant recommendation tool. And so the system can create a series of questions. Now, to be clear, this is a very rudimentary kind of example of what we're seeing here. There's a whole lot of kind of really powerful infrastructure on the back end that's happened to kind of build this out. But the system will ask a series of questions, and we're basically building like an ideal, what I call like prospect profile about the applicant. That from there will read in real time the opportunities that you have available, which ones that they align with, which ones that they don't meet eligibility requirements for, which ones they do meet the criteria for, and then the system will basically say, hey, look, based off of your answers or your questions, these are the three opportunities that you're not only eligible for, but you match up with. You can even like prioritize the rankings there, and then allow the applicant from there to pick which of the grants they want to submit for. Because you remember how I started, we can actually create a custom experience now for them because they chose the Linux Wilder grant. We can now ask them very dedicated questions about the grant, different deliverables, different dates and deadlines, different score sheets. Heck, we can even pair them up with certain team members of yours that align with the demographic of the applicant's profile. So a whole lot of pairing and matching that are happening in real time based off of content being submitted. Now, on the split side of that, what if I were to answer a question that basically didn't align me with a particular opportunity, or in fact, I'm not even eligible for a specific reason. So, for example, I live in Nebraska. Maybe this is a economic development grant that's given out by the state. Clearly, somebody from Iowa or Kansas wouldn't receive a Nebraska-funded grant. So, therefore, the system might recognize their social or their zip code and then say something along the lines of, "Hey, we appreciate your application. However, this is a notice that the grant eligibility didn't quite align. Try again, or if this is a mistake, try again," right? And so we just save that applicant potentially tens of hours building out this grant application, and we save your staff hundreds of hours sifting through additional people very similar to this person that wouldn't be eligible that try to squeak through. So again, we're trying to align applicants with the right criteria. So moving on, if you remember, I actually chose the Lennox Wilder grant. And so as I progress through this form, the system is now creating a custom experience or a personalized experience to the applicant because we know who they are, we know the contents within there, so we can start to cater the applications form directly for them. As always, any questions, comments, or thoughts that you want to toss in the chat, we'll go ahead and answer those. I am going to pause here because as we kind of go through here, this is now where we start to bleed into both AI detection as well as assistance. Because most grants that we work with, as well as scholarships or funding opportunities, are asking a series of kind of short answers, essays, to get a better understanding for how the funds are going to be utilized, what the impact is going to be. As you guys all know, there's so many different kind of formats to these applications. So how do we do two things? One, and set up the applicant for success to let them be the best version of themselves and create the best application. while B, creating consistency and weeding out those that are kind of unjustly using tools to build it for them, right? And so that kind of goes back now to the presentation where we get into what I call enhanced content creation. So leveraging a series of tools that will do kind of two key things. Number one is lower the barrier. So the goal behind lowering the barrier is that A, we're going to increase the application rates. And then goal number two is to set them up for success by giving them tools to generate the best content as humanly possible. That way we're kind of creating an even playing field for all the applicants with a very focused, consistent experience. So number one is that we obviously don't want to promote tools to write content for them from start to finish. So it's empowering creation, not duplication. So typically what I mean by that is we want to basically create a framework of what the expectations would be. So for example, tell me more about how this grant is going to help you achieve your mission or vision. I can start to leverage these tools to create a framework that answers the question at a high level, like bullet points, and then allows me to kind of jump in there now, really elaborate and kind of tweak it and make it very custom to how the funds will actually be utilized to achieve our mission and vision, not ready from scratch. I'm also kind of with my role at the company, I'm a visionary. I'm really, really bad when it comes to spell check. You already probably caught it, right? There was a typo on that first page with intelligent. So for me, and I also be leveraging tools kind of similar to Grammarly, where I can kind of make some spell check updates or some grammar updates or some structure updates. Again, taking my ideology, my thoughts, my vision, and putting it into a very digestible manner that kind of does its best job reflecting of why I deserve the funds and setting me up for success. The other thing that we started to see quite a bit of is obviously like an interview concept. And interviews are very, very common in the scholarship provider space, less so common in grant making, although it is becoming more and more popular for a couple different reasons. Number one is that there are tools out there that people are going to leverage to create their application forms. And so, how do we start to bring in a sense of personality, emotion, and vision to their application that we can start to separate from the handwritten notes that really doesn't do a great job whatsoever, kind of portraying those feelings. Number two is it does add a very personalized touch point. We as a mission-driven organizations, it is very much about relationship building, and so interviews are becoming a common practice now in these types of campaigns. With that said, not all applicants have the support system around them or the resources to excel when it comes to interviewing. And so leveraging artificial intelligence and AI and some of these learning models to basically serve them up potential interview questions, allow them to practice answering them, and then taking the results, putting it back into the model, and then kind of transitioning into like follow-up questions. That way it's almost like an interactive interview versus like a bunch of stage questions that they can match, right? So if I say something that might tweak the next interview question that might pop up or a follow-up question. So being able to think on your feet and kind of do things like that. So again, the entire concept here is number one, we want to make opportunities available to the applicants. Number two, personalize the experience for them. And then number three, equip them to write the best content as humanly possible, because at the end of the day, we want them to succeed. We want to give them grant funding. We just want to give the right people funding, which then leads us into the third point today, which is really want to spend the bulk of our time talking about, which is going to be how do we detect those that aren't authentic and are using tools to write content from scratch. So with that said, we're launching this here probably the next month or so. Anybody on the wait list will be kind of grandfathered in. Obviously, in the future, those that sign up will be at a premium. And the reason why we're doing this is that we're on this journey together. And so I'm going to kind of run through what this might look like, but at the same time, a series of questions I think we internally need to ask ourselves and one another. Like, how do we want these types of AI tools to work? How does it provide the most value to us? How is it the most fair to the process? And things like that. And so number one, we'll kind of get into, if you remember this example, again, this was real time, a series of questions and essay prompts being plugged into Chat GPT that then filled out an entire application question. So how do we know which questions were written through ChatGPT, B, those that had frameworks built for them? So for example, demonstrating leadership skills as a category, but then fine-tuned from the applicant. And then C, if you're a research grant or a research proposal, how do we know you're not ripping off somebody else's idea completely through plagiarism? And so the idea behind this that we'll kind of get into with the tool is going to be AI generated content is inevitable and it's going to be promoted, but how much? And then what's the threshold look like? So again, is it leveraging tools to create framework or is it the full application form? Is it going to be text-based prompts, essay driven, or is it going to be file uploads, or is it going to be a combination of both? If we feel that we want people to write essays, how do we kind of ensure that we kind of create this kind of application structure that gives you the data in a way that you can make decisions off of? Whereas if it came in through, say, for example, like video, you won't be able to do any type of detection on that, right? And so the questions that we have to start asking ourselves is like, what are we going to do with this information? We hosted a webinar the other day about this as well. We kind of broke this into two different time slots for the sake of time. And there was a lot of questions that popped up that basically said, like, what's the validity? So if you're checking content and you're basically going to rank people and let us know what percent of their content was generated, like how confident are you in that? And that's a great question because we don't ultimately know because the algorithms and the AI tools are adaptive and they're changing so rapidly. And so the concept here is how do we just give you the data to make data-driven decision making off of? And so some of our clients have already said, you know what, I'm not even going to check. I'm just going to go through it the normal process. And then once we narrow it down to say, for example, like the top 10 or those that we're going to award funding to, then we're going to check on those ones. If it's very, very clear who might have leveraged those tools, we'll talk with them, we'll work with them, we'll help kind of define it, or we'll replace them with somebody else as like an honorable mention kind of queue that kind of slides into their position. Others have drawn a very clear line. They said, you know what, look, we have so many applications that we need to do two things. Number one is that we need to create some type of workflow and structure that helps us vet applications very, very quickly. And so one of those components might be plagiarism or AI detection. If we feel that, on average, people are using AI to generate 30% of their content, that's the threshold. Anything over than that, we're just going to disqualify. So if we had 100 applications, we disqualify 20 people. Now we're just focused on those 80. We'll get more into how we can also help vet some of those as well. So it's kind of a good way to kind of narrow down the field. But then we start to present this up with what is the threshold? Like, what is that kind of clear, direct line? Like, is it 100%? If we're starting to promote framework creation, so for example, grammar, spelling, ideology, does that inherently give that person a 30% AI score? And so what is the threshold? Is it going to be 60%? These are questions I'm kind of asking you. And as you're kind of going through your processes, number one, is like, are you starting to identify applicants who are leveraging these tools? Is it becoming a problem yet? If it is, and you're starting to kind of read through their content, like, what are you looking for that's like, hey, this is a total red flag? It's a different industry completely, and I won't get into names here, but we work with a rather large essay contest for youth. And there was they had thousands of applications, and the review team was spending hundreds of hours reading through all these essays. And they were flagging a whole bunch of them saying, hey, like this is pretty clear that either A, they used AI or B, their parents wrote it. And so we just wasted a bunch of volunteer hours reading through essays that aren't even going to be qualified or candidates because of that reason. And then now, from an operations perspective, we need to reach out to those applicants and figure out what the heck happened, right? And so, in this type of use case, maybe we can identify them earlier on before it even gets in the hands of the volunteers and in the hands of the committee members. So, my question to you, very cut and dry, is if we were to kind of snap our fingers and I was a magic genie, like what are the three things that you just absolutely love to see within this type of process that would either A, save you a tremendous amount of time, or B, elevate the experience for applicants and committee members? So as we're thinking through that, here's kind of a preview of kind of what this may look like. And so to kind of help visualize it, again, this is Wingman powered by Reviewer. It's our first, I think the only at this point in time, AI assistant for grant makers. And so the idea behind this is that you're going to have this menu of all the applicants or grantees that are applying to your program. And in real time, we can start to scan through their application forms and we can read the content that was submitted, text-based file uploads, you name it. And we can kind of create two separate scores, one of which might be like, okay, and not to get too deep in the weeds, there's a lot of different tools out there. We keep talking about Chat GPT because it probably is the most popular. 5 years from now, 1 year from now, who knows what that looks like? So the idea is to kind of always constantly incorporate these other type of tools that are out there, and then basically give you a detection score that says, look, like we have 0% identification of this applicant used any AI detection. Whereas on another example, like, we're 100% confident that every piece of content that was written used a tool. On the flip side of that, we may also look at like the plagiarism detection. We may look at, okay, 0% was plagiarized, but this one we feel like 40% was plagiarized. And then basically how do we let you deep dive into that to identify what was plagiarized and where did it come from. So there's a lot of things happening. The main goal here, though, is from your dashboards to be able to in real time get a sense of, okay, how big of an issue is this? I mentioned the term threshold, so we can start to create averages of like, okay, the average application had this percent, so you can kind of create that line that says, okay, show me all applicants either above or below that, and then again, take decision on it, either deep dive and review them, advance them on, disqualify people, right? Like you have a lot of options and things that you can do. But the goal here is to be able to sort and filter and at a glance figure out, okay, like how much is this actually happening? Now, to deep dive, if we open an applicant up, there's actually two things we want to look at. Number one is going to be on a question by question basis, like what's being flagged and why. And then number two is at a high level, giving you a dedicated interface to kind of see in real time those flags that are happening. So if I open up an applicant here, you'll notice that we have a series of kind of essay prompts. Again, this could be essays, personal statements. It might be like how the budgets are going to be utilized. It might be impact statements, all these types of things. And I want to kind of preface that these AI tools are as strong as it is the candidate using them, right? And so I would not be shocked to see applicants taking a grant reporting template because they were selected for a grant, piping that in there, tossing in some metrics and having it write impact statement for them. It wouldn't be hard to test that, but I'm quite confident it's happening. So in this example, we can see on a question by question basis, two different indicators. One is the AI indicator, and then number two is going to be the plagiarism indicator. But in this use case, I can actually click on the score and it's going to pop up and show me exactly what was identified, how much of it was human written, how much of it was AI written, and then what content within here was AI driven. So a lot of really powerful insights and metrics that we can kind of check against. On the plagiarism side of things, very similar. I can actually open it up and it's going to flag the content itself. It's going to show me identical matches, how much of that content was matched, but then kind of paraphrased or changed. And then on top of that, we can actually deep dive into the source that that content was found from. So again, two kind of parallel checks that are happening. One and or both might be relevant to you, but the idea is on a per question basis. Hey, this was flagged. Here's why. Now, here's the data for you to kind of go do your own exploratory research to figure out what you want to do with it. On top of that, we can actually make it even easier. So we can kind of create this dedicated dashboard that would show you, as you can see here, a listing of all the content in the form that we checked against. Because at the end of the day, your application structure might be 100 questions. I have a pretty strong feeling that people aren't going to be using AI to create a first name, last name, or email, right? So let's not check for that type of stuff. What are like the 3 to 4 components that you are going to check for? And you can see it shows up in this list. It'll show you on a question by question basis the AI detection score, as well as the plagiarism detection score. And so from here, I can open it up and then very similar, I can kind of read this prompt, view it, and then boom, that's what we identified. So at the end of the day, I want to be very, very clear. There's so many moving parts to this. We know that at least 70% of applications are leveraging these tools to write content. Our goal isn't to make decisions for you. Our goal is basically flag them so you can do your own exploratory research. Do with it what you want. Now, is there automation on top of that you want to see happening? Please do let us know because there's a whole kind of next phase to this that we're kind of masterminds and we're thinking through. But that's kind of what we're currently thinking now. So that's going to be the Wingman AI assistant tool that's coming out in the next month or so. The next thing I want to look at is more from an operational perspective. So how do we help you and your team streamline operations, but also confirm and empower a non-biased review and selection process? So in review, streamline administrative workflows, there was kind of 2 bullets on the agenda kind of lumped together here. Number one is trying to create themes. So you have all these applications that are being created. And because we know who they are, the content that they're submitting, we can start to parse this information out and auto categorize or auto group these applicants into grant opportunities, themes, locations. And the reason why we want to do that is a couple parts. Number one is it gives you great filtering and sorting capability to make informed decisions off of. Number two, which is actually the third bullet here, is the pairing up with judges because you have dedicated teams of individuals who are going to review these applications. And it's very likely that there's a demographic or a separate skill set that that reviewer has that makes them a better match to review certain candidates. So, for example, if you offer two different grants, one is for surgical oncology and the other is for software, I can guarantee you that I'm probably not the best person to review a surgical oncology grant. I'm pretty darn good when it comes to software. And so, how do you then be able to read these applications as they come in and then pair them up with industry experts and the right people to make the review processes off of? So that's kind of that. While we're on that third bullet, I'm also going to talk a little bit about how we want to see this happen. So, okay, great. You collected these grant applications. Now we got to pair them with the team. Maybe you are leveraging some of those backgrounds or those details that makes them a better fit. There's also kind of two different components that we'd like to see happen. Number one is, yes, you want to redact confidential data. So we don't want any biases that are happening with the selection process. But number two, and this will make way more sense here in a little bit, is the random distribution. So if you have, let's say, for example, 100 grant applications, you got a 10-person review team, I don't feel that it's fair to have the 10-person review team review all 100 grant applications because A, there is no way that they have the mental bandwidth to do so. B, they cannot decipher the difference between the 60th and 100 applications they reviewed. So how do we kind of build this structure where we can take all of these applications and then randomly distribute it out to the reviewers and or combine that with the right type of applicant based off of expertise? We have some of our clients that will do this and they'll say, hey, you know what, let's just give every judge 10 people. Or they might use this concept called queuing, which again, this is really where the power comes into play. Or we could say, you know what, I don't really care how many they review. I really don't. They can review 100 if they want to. I don't think they're going to. But what I can tell you is I need every single grant applicant to get reviewed 5 times, at least 5 times, or no more than five, no less than five. So we just take the grant applications, we distribute it out to the team, and then once that applicant's been reviewed exactly 5 times, it disassociates itself from all the other reviewers, so no longer does it get kind of queued up or reviewed, right? So a lot of really interactive, real-time decision making that's happening. Before I get to the normalization of results, which I think is a really cool piece here, I'm going to talk about the summarizing of applicant content. So I mentioned earlier on that people are wanting to leverage AI detection to help kind of narrow down a bigger pool of applicants. Number two is how do we take their grant applications? And then again, it might be a 50 question form, it might be a 20 question form. How do we take their content? How do we summarize it into a more digestible manner? And then you and your team and your vetting team can use the summaries to kind of say, hey, you know what? Yes, no, put them into the yes pile. And then those are the ones that kind of move on to phase two, which is the built-in judging, selection, randomization, things like that. So the last piece of this conversation is another brand new feature that we just launched at Reviewer called normalization of results. And it's incredibly powerful because bullet number 3 under random distribution, while it's powerful, just presented a tremendous risk to you as an organization. What I mean by that is if you have different people reviewing different applications and everybody has the same reviews coming in about them, how do you counteract reviewers who are a bit more stingy than those who are a bit easier? So, for example, I'm a huge fan of Shark Tank on ABC. If I'm pitching to those judges, Mr. Wonderful is going to score me in a different way than Mark Cuban will, right? But because your scorecard might be on a scale of 1 to 30, this is just simple math for me, and Mr. Wonderful gave me a 15 and Mark gave me a 28, doesn't mean that my 15 is bad. Mr. Wonderful actually never gave higher than a 15 before. So while it's half of Mark's scores, it's still the very best score that that judge has ever given. So if you're leveraging total scores and average scores, I'm going to fall down that ranking super, super fast. And that's unfair to me because I actually had a strong review. So how do we start to do that stuff? So question that just came in. No, Storylane is one of our own. It's a tool that we're using to kind of build out these webinars and these interactive tours. We are kind of building our own integration with numerous sources out there to do these checks. So there won't be one single source by no means. Number one, the reason why we're doing that is because most of those AI detection tools are flagging things for different reasons. And so we're trying to bring together the best of the best into one centralized hub. So yeah, Storylane, if you saw that logo, that is our own tool that we're using to kind of build out these interactive tours. So back to the normalization results. Let's take a quick peek at like how this optimization works. So as a grant maker, number one is that we want to start to, again, to pair up the right people to review the right applicant. So what we feel that you should be doing is creating not just applicant profiles, but also review team profiles. So if you have external reviewers or evaluators to your program, let's start to capture powerful data about them that tells a better story about who they should be reviewing. Once we know that, as you can see here, we can start to load them up and add them to reviewer and then pair them up automatically with the applicants that kind of mesh and jive well with their expertise and with their backgrounds. So once they're in the platform, this is the concept called buckets. And this is a super robust and adaptable usability feature that we're basically taking these groups of applicants and these groups of reviewers, and we're putting them into a bucket together based off a wide variety of automations. Again, it could be randomization, it could be backgrounds, it could be expertise. But the general goal here is that you yourself are not putting people in places, it's happening on its own. So in this use case, if you remember earlier on, I as a grantee applied to the Lennox Wilder grant, I'm probably sitting in this bucket right now. The next step is that we have to assign out that bucket to a panel of review committee members. Now, again, this is very simple example, just kind of help visualize it. But then going back earlier on, what if you had 150 grantees in this bucket and 10 reviewers? Like we can't physically have them score all of them. So what I would do is I'd actually open my bucket up and then boom, with the power of some of those intelligent tools, we can basically say, look, here's a listing of all of our grantees. Here's how many people are supposed to review them. And then here's who those individuals are. And then I can start to say things like, okay, well, why don't we just do this? Let's just give every applicant no more than 6 review members and no less than 4. Or I can be very, very specific and say every grantee gets reviewed exactly 3 times. And then the system will start to identify those trends and start to divvy out the applications to the qualified reviewers to make those numbers match. Now, with that said, the thing we didn't talk about is detecting conflicts of interest or redacting of themselves. So a lot of times the review team will indicate, hey, I can't review this person for this reason. So from there, we can start to override the details and say, okay, great. So instead of reviewing Gabrielle, let's review Gilligan. So again, this is all happening on the fly, very adaptive. Remember I mentioned earlier, though, we just presented a giant challenge with that randomization. So let's look at how we can start to generate results. So when the review team comes into the system, number one, lower the barrier for them. We give them a menu of who they're supposed to review. We didn't talk much about this today, but the redaction of data. So being able to identify PII or demographic details or basically self confidentiality that the review team should not see and then redacting it from their point of view. But the review committee then simply gets a split screen. So the applicant's profile is on one side. As you can see through here, information has been redacted. We got short answers, essays, file uploads, all that kind of fun stuff. And then off to the right is our selection tool. Now, the selection tool is extremely powerful because number one, a lot of times if you're using a mathematic-based rubric for selections, which you should be doing, prior webinar, we talked about proof of processes, which is basically setting an expectations of a fair process where an applicants apply, you let them know you're going to get reviewed this many times. This is the score sheet that you're going to be utilized. Here's when the results are going to come out. Basically being able to map a proof of process to actual features. But a lot of times your review committee gets really, really bogged down in numbers, right? How do I justify a 3 versus a 4 or a 4 versus a 5? So what we want to see happening instead is treat them like humans. Again, create a custom personalized experience. So the review team can kind of side by side view the profiles and then answer questions because it's really easy to answer questions. I'm not doing math. There are some indicators within a submission form that, again, using these types of tools, we can automatically assign point values to. So, for example, if there's a certain grant funding opportunity that you're very proportion of, if it matches your mission or your vision, we can actually allocate points to an application that happens automatically if the judges themselves don't do. It just happens in real time, so that way they don't get bogged down in it. But the idea here is that the review team can kind of fill out the score sheet, and then at the bottom of the page, it'll actually give it a score, and it'll do the mathematics for you. So just because I chose in this example good, great, or ugly, this might be worth 3 points, this might be worth 5 points. We give a total score. We then build out these leaderboards, and it'll show you in real time a listing of all of your applicants, who evaluated them, total scores, averages, etc. So in theory, this is beautiful. Here's the results. In a less perfect world, which is the world that we live in, you can see that there's a big problem. So in this example, my second highest, so maybe you're going to give out grants to 2 people, right? Just 2. You're only giving out 2 giant grants. Number 2 and number 3 are already quite close to one another. However, if you look at these details, Judge Judy gave this a 31 and Mark gave it a 12. So that's a pretty giant discrepancy between the two of them. If either of them were to judge in different directions, the results completely change. Now, again, just because Mark gave a 12, it hurts the average, but is that a bad thing if Mark never gives higher than a 15? No, absolutely not. So don't penalize them for that. So here's where I can kind of introduce the normalization concept. So again, this is in a CSV format to kind of help visualize it. What basically happens here is you get a listing of A, all of your applicants, B, all of your judges and how they scored per question. So we have judge number one, judge number two, judge number three, and here's how they scored question number one in the score sheet. Judge number one gave it an 8, judge number two gave it a 9, judge number three gave it a 7, etc. So as I kind of scroll through here, you'll notice that we have them answering all of our different questions. Then we get to a section that we basically say, okay, great. Now let's start to dissect the average score a particular judge gives. And this one actually sticks out like a sore thumb because you can see here, we'll call this Judge Judy, right? So Judge Judy's average score is a 23.8, whereas let's just say this is Tony Stark, gives out an average of 34. Wow, what a difference that will skew your numbers. Like, absolutely. So then you can start to say, okay, well, how did Judge Judy or Tony Stark evaluate a particular applicant that's against their average? So you can see here that Tony Stark gave Elon Musk a score of 28, which is pretty substantially below his average. Whereas Judge Judy over here scored Schmidt a 16, which is below her average. So often this display score column is now where we're comparing the individual scores against their averages. So in this example, basically 1 is average. If I gave this person a 1, that means they match my actual average. Anything lower than 1 means that that judge scored them lower than average. Anything over 1 means that they scored them higher than average. Now we can take that to do both totals and averages. So we get a display score. And these are basically your rankings. So in this example, Bruce Banner is our highest rated applicant, even though, and this is pretty clear, even though Bruce got a 30 from this judge, you know that Bruce is on average scored 1.15 times over average, whereas Tony Stark was scored a 0.9, which is almost a full tenth of a point below average. So again, we're taking into consideration totals, averages, individual judging characteristics, and then creating new averages off of those. So really, really powerful stuff here that helps you guys make better, more informed judging and selection decisions off of. So